what I've heard from the organization, I don't know that, like, I think Cowboys fans look and think it's a no-brainer that he's going to get another contract, and I don't think, I'd be shocked if he did. Really. I mean, I just don't think the Cowboys believe that they're going to give him a second contract because the running back position is, so devalued. I mean, today is Friday, February 22nd, and this is the Cowboys Beat along CLNS Media. I'm Ari Temkin. He's Patrick Conn. Cowboys Beat with Ari and Conn. And it's the off season, but man, the storylines continue to flow. On today's show, we'll talk about Terrence Williams and David Irving. They're officially gone from the Cowboys, so what's their legacy? Who will be missed more? I think the way people look at Terrence Williams is probably not exactly an adequate description of the type of player that he was for the Cowboys, so we'll do that. Plus, I think an interesting subplot is playing out this offseason with Zeke Elliott and what Le'Veon Bell's status could mean for the future of Zeke Elliott. That's all coming up. But we start today talking about DeMarcus Lawrence, who's really good. He's good. They should bring him back.
That's debatable. No, not really. Elite level defensive end, top 3 in the league. Yeah, definitely bring him back.
As good as stopping the run as he is as a pass rusher, which is a very unique skill set for a pass rusher to have. Yeah, probably the type of guy that makes your defense special. But DeMarcus Lawrence has already said, he played the 1 year on the franchise tag. He's not going to sign the franchise tender if he's offered it again. Okay. Which means there is a deadline of March 5th for players that are offered the franchise tag to sign it, therefore giving them the franchise tag for the next season. Now, they still have a period of time after they sign it for them to work out a long-term deal, but Lawrence has said from the start he's not going to sign it. So what we've heard from the Cowboys front office is they haven't had any discussions with DeMarcus Lawrence yet. Well, it's February 22nd, Patrick. The March 5th deadline is fast approaching, so if Lawrence isn't going to sign that tender, they better get to talking here pretty soon, because March 5th is going to be here soon.
Yeah, it's something that needs to happen, and I don't know if I necessarily believe that they haven't had any discussions.
Good point.
There's a lot of stuff that gets put out in the media for headlines or clickbait or whatever you want to call it. I don't think that they haven't had any communication, but I would believe that they haven't had like a substantial conversations regarding the contract. Yeah, March 5th is coming up soon. I fully expected them to slap him with that tag once more, just to kind of give them some time. But yeah, they better do something, and they better do it quickly. I mean, we're talking, just a couple weeks away.
What's the number for you?
100 mil. 5 years, 100 mil.
How much guaranteed?
I probably would go somewhere in the 45 to 50. I think that's what you got to pay a top level defensive end, especially one that impacts the game in both the run and the pass the way that he does.
Yeah.
I mean, because essentially when you're looking at it, outside of him, who really makes an impact on that defensive line?
Well, and I mean, the reason I thought, he had 10.5 sacks this year, which is down 4 sacks in the previous year, but I thought he had a better year this year, even though the sack numbers would indicate that because of that. He commands extra attention, which is obviously opening up opportunities for everybody else.
And playing the entire year with a torn labrum, yeah. That might have impacted a little bit.
So that's, your estimation is about $20 million a year, which I think is like, what's Von Miller, J.J. Watt, like what are they at on an annual basis? Do you know? It's like,
it's close to that. Definitely is. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what the going rate's going to have to be. I think defensive end, I mean, it's one of the money five that I'm always talking about.
Right.
So I think like last year, even though he was on the franchise tag, he was paid like a top four. So it's not much higher. I think I'm trying to look. I mean, yeah, I think it's right about that.
Yeah, I wonder if like 20 to me sounds low. I mean, I'd be thrilled if I was the Cowboys and I could get it at 20. I don't know. Here's what here's what I find
for you.
What was that?
I got the numbers for you.
Okay.
$20 million would pay him slightly more than Von Miller.
Wow.
Khalil Mack gets 23.5. That's the average annual salary for edge rushers, according to overthecap.com.
Wow.
Last year, he and Ezekiel Ansah were both paid the same because I believe they were both franchise tagged at $17,143.
What's the franchise tag this year?
It's going to be higher than that. It's probably going to be about 18. But so I'm thinking 20 is what it's going to take to get him, signed. I would say 5 years, 100 mil. And that would make him the second highest paid defensive end in the league.
So here's what I find to be kind of interesting. And so you brought up the fact that he played almost the entire year with a torn labrum. Doesn't sound like an easy thing to do. He was an absolute beast. 10.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, had an interception, was a monster. I mean, and then there's obviously a lot of statistics that you can't even really attribute to him, like sacks for other players that basically were because of him. But he's got to have surgery on that torn labrum. He hasn't had it yet, which is interesting. Right? Most players, they have to have surgery, they have it immediately following the season. But DeMarcus Lawrence hasn't had it yet. And so Mike Bassick, from the G-Bag Nation on 105.3 The Fan, here locally in the DFW area, sort of posed this idea that maybe he's using that as leverage. That's a 3 to 4 month recovery. So what if they offer him the franchise tag, he says, okay, signs it, then decides a couple of months later to have surgery, oh, and by the way, I've got 3 to 4 months of recovery, I'm going to miss the entire year. He'd basically be doing what Le'Veon Bell did, the only difference would be he'd have a sort of justifiable reason to do it because of the injury, because of the recovery from the surgery.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he could. I don't think that that's the type of person that DeMarcus Lawrence is, but he also said he ain't signing it, so
true.
I could see that. I mean,
it's just interesting he hasn't had surgery yet, right? Like, why? What other reason would it be? He says he's trying to figure out a date with the doctor. Like, if DeMarcus Lawrence needs to have surgery, he can find a doctor that could do it tomorrow. Like, I'm pretty sure he's not like one of us. Like, he can have surgery tomorrow from one of the best doctors in the world if he wanted to. So it's odd he hasn't had the surgery yet.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
I don't know, I just heard that this morning and I was thinking, wow, could be a brilliant leverage move because it's all about leverage. And if you're a player, it's very difficult to gain leverage, especially with these franchise tags, and obviously the Players Association agreed to them with the last collective bargaining agreement, but it's just a raw deal for the players and a lot of them know it. And so they've got to figure out ways to get leverage. And that would be a very interesting way to create leverage. Here's the other piece about DeMarcus Lawrence. He's a beast. You sign him long term, right? However, how worried are you in signing him long term about his injury history? Because, he broke his foot during training camp his rookie year. He had surgery, that year. He played in 16 games his second year, but had a bad back and had back surgery after that season. And then had, the worst season of his career where he played in, just a few games and then had back surgery again. So if you're counting at home, that's 3 for 3. 3 years, 3 surgeries, 1 foot surgery, 2 back surgeries. Then he came in year 4 and had that beast of a year where he went for 14.5 sacks and exploded on the scene. And so the Cowboys said, all right, let's run it back. We're not going to pay you in a contract year where you outperformed there. But didn't have surgery, was fine in the offseason, and now, of course, we know he's going to have surgery for a torn labrum that he played through the entire year. So does that concern you at all? Here is now a guy having his 4th surgery in 5 years. He has shown an ability to play and play exceedingly well through injuries. But how much does that concern you in terms of a long-term contract for DeMarcus Lawrence?
I mean, it's concerning, and that's why I said only 5 years.
Yeah.
You know, I would want to go much more than that just for the simple fact that, like you said, there's 4 surgeries in 5 seasons, essentially. Right now it's 3 and 5 because he hadn't actually had the surgery, but you know it's going to happen.
Totally.
But still, 3 out of 5 is still bad.
Yeah.
60% of your career you've had to have a surgery after the season.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. It's concerning, and that's why I said let's go 5 years. I mean, obviously the last 2 years he's had 24 and a half sacks in 2 years combined. I mean, so
you have to pay him.
Right. You got to pay the guy. I mean, and like I said, who else is going to make that impact? Randy Gregory? We don't know. I mean, he shows flashes of it, but you know, he's not the player that DeMarcus Lawrence is. He's one of those guys that I remember they went up and they traded up for him to get him, and so they obviously felt very highly of him, and I don't think that anything that he's shown on the field in the last 4 years has given them any reason to show any pause or any concern.
Are you more comfortable paying Lawrence between 20 and 25 million than paying Dak between 25 and 30 million?
Dak Prescott's never missed a game.
He's not. 51 of 51 if you include the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me because we had this conversation last week about why you don't pay a quarterback like that. I just feel like I think the bigger concern is paying Dak. Not just because of the reasons that we talked about last week was about how, you know, eating up 15% of your salary cap essentially means you're not winning anything. The bigger concern is so you give a guy like that a $30 million a year contract. Is he ever going to live up to that?
I mean, not unless he becomes a top 5 player in the league, which I guess is not impossible, but certainly something I don't think is probable.
Right. So you're essentially, you know, I mean, I know we're going down a rabbit hole here with the Dak Prescott because that wasn't even a topic for today, but that's my bigger concern, and that's why I think paying Tank is less concerning than paying Dak because I question whether he'll ever be a top 5 quarterback in this league, whereas I know Tank Lawrence has what it takes to be a top 5 defensive end because, well, he's paid like it and he plays like it.
Yeah. This is the Cowboys Beat on CLNS Media. Okay, so as for Zeke Elliott, the Cowboys obviously have him in mind in terms of, you know, what they want to do long term for him. But I certainly think so he was the same draft class as Dak, but obviously he's a first round pick, so there's the 5th year option. So the Cowboys have control over him for the next 2 years. And my guess is they'll franchise tag him the following year, meaning they have control over him for 3 years. Do you think, okay, better question, would you give him a long-term deal after that? Would you give him a long-term deal before a franchise tag? Or do you control him for 3 years, try to give him a franchise tag that 4th year, or let him walk? Take basically the same approach with that the Steelers took with Le'Veon Bell.
I think when you look at how the position is valued in the NFL, don't get me wrong, Ezekiel Elliott is one of my favorite running backs. I've loved him when he stepped foot in Ohio State and the things that he was able to do. So he's a guy that I always wanted. But I have a hard time thinking, why not, you know, get your 5th year option, franchise him for 2 years and let him walk. Because, well, if you look at the workload tells you that he's going to break down.
Yeah.
I mean, running backs just don't last in the NFL like they used to, which is surprising because there's so many rules to help the offense out. But at the same time, you look at how many times he's touching the ball and everything. Yeah, I think you kind of have to go, all right, well, we'll give you your 5th-year option, franchise you twice, and then let you walk. I hate to say it, but that's probably what you have to do. Me personally, I want to see him remain a Cowboy just because I believe in what he does as a football player, and he's so young. And maybe that might be another reason. He came into the league. He was 20 years old. I mean, he couldn't even drink when he came to the NFL. So you're talking about a really young player who's, 23. And he's been the top running back 2 out of the last 3 years. He should have been 3 in a row. I mean, if, he wasn't punished for not doing anything.
Yeah.
But, but you're talking about a top 2 running back in the league over the last 3 years. You'd be hard pressed to walk away from that. I mean, I know people want to compare him to the Le'Veon Bell, but I don't think Le'Veon ever played to the level or impact that Ezekiel Elliott plays at.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, Le'Veon Bell is a really good runner. He's a top 5 back in this league, and he does a lot of great things. It just seems like Ezekiel Elliott is just that much better.
The bigger question is, with Zeke Elliott, what happens if he decides to hold out? What do the Cowboys do? We'll get to that in a moment. But first, I have to tell you about The Athletic. Today's episode of the Cowboys Beat is brought to you by The Athletic. The Athletic, a subscription-based publisher of smarter sports coverage for die-hard fans. The model is simple. No ads, no pop-ups, and no autoplay videos. Instead, readers get in-depth coverage written by journalists who know their teams and leagues inside and out. Today's Cowboys Beat listeners get 40% off by using promo code Cowboys Beat. That's promo code Cowboys Beat, making the subscription just $2.99 per month. Again, subscribe today using promo code Cowboys Beat to be a part of the future of sports journalism. Look, every morning when I wake up, the first thing I go towards is the Athletic app, because I get everything customized, the writers I want, the type of content I want. You could specialize it in any capacity, and it's like your morning newspaper. And there's no pop-ups, no advertising. It's just right there. $2.99 per month. Use promo code CowboysBeat. And right now is the best time to get it because you're getting a great deal. Plus, you get fantastic draft coverage. My buddy KT Turner, Kevin Turner from the Ben and Skin Show. He does great draft breakdowns. So does Jeff Kavanaugh, Bob Sturm, Kelvin Watkins. They've got fantastic Cowboys coverage in the offseason, plus Rangers, Mavericks, and everything else you're interested in. Subscribe today. Use promo code CowboysBeat. Visit The Athletic. Use promo code CowboysBeat. You're going to get 40% off, $2.99 per month. It doesn't get any better than that. Subscribe to The Athletic today. Yeah, I mean, I think, and what I've heard from the organization, I don't know that, I think Cowboys fans look and think it's a no-brainer that he's going to get another contract, and I don't think, I'd be shocked if he did. Really. I mean, I just don't think the Cowboys believe that they're going to give him a second contract because the running back position is, so devalued. I mean, at this point, Zeke is one of the highest paid running backs in the NFL on a rookie contract. That should tell you how devalued that position is.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
What happened after DeMarco Murray set the franchise record for yards on season?
He was not very good. Now, he did have...
He was let go, though. I mean,
yes. They did not re-sign him.
I'm saying, running backs who touch the ball 492 times in a season, they don't... History says you're not going to be that good unless you're Eric Dickerson. True. I mean, there's like a handful of guys that touched the ball like that in a season and were actually as good or better the following year. Every other running back that I looked at when I did the research on it, they fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
And what happened to DeMarco after that? He fell off a cliff. He was never that player.
Right. But DeMarco is not special. Zeke is special, right? Or he's supposed to be.
Right. He is. I'm just saying.
No, I think it's a valid point. I think it's not a minority opinion. I think.
Right.
It seems like conventional wisdom, especially when you look at DeMarco Murray. I guess, I just think, and I know what the rebuttal is to this. You just can't take a guy with the 4th overall pick that you don't plan on getting a second contract to. Now, the rebuttal is, well, they took him for Tony Romo, and, because he was the missing piece to the offense that Romo needed. But even with that, that's not a good enough excuse. You draft a guy with a top 5 pick that's going to be an all pro for a decade. Okay. And if you don't, then that's not the right pick at 5. They should have taken Carson Wentz at that spot, right? I mean, obviously they couldn't have, he was gone, but you know what I mean? They could have traded up to get him. I'm just saying, take a quarterback in that spot. That was always, that's where you get starting quarterbacks. Top 5, the majority, we've talked before, the majority of starting quarterbacks in the NFL are first round picks, and then you go even further and the majority of them are their first, second, third overall picks. So I hate the idea of they took him with the 4th pick and they're not even going to get him to a second contract because he's a running back. It's well, then don't take a running back with the 4th pick, even if it is for Tony Romo.
The pro Jalen Ramsey crowd, if Ezekiel Elliott does not get a second contract, then we're see, told you we should have took Ramsey.
And Ramsey, I'll tell you, this time last year, you could have made the argument. I was very pro Ramsey. I think you were too, but he didn't have as good of a year this year. So
I was during the draft. I was give me Zeke.
You were pro Zeke? Okay.
I wanted Zeke over Ramsey. Yes, I thought Ramsey was that good. And I thought he could do a lot of great things for the defense, but I just felt like Ezekiel Elliott was a game changer.
Yeah, and he is. There's no question about it. So here's the other part to the Zeke piece. So I think the Cowboys if they had their way, the Cowboys would basically do the exact same thing that the Steelers did with Le'Veon Bell, right? They franchise tag him for 2 years and let him walk. What happens if Zeke Elliott holds out this year? What happens if he says, I'm not coming to minicamp, I'm not coming to OTAs, I want a new contract? What do you do if you're the Cowboys?
Man, Ezekiel Elliott has all the leverage right there. And I say that because of the depth behind him. You trust Rod Smith carry the ball 25, 30 times a game?
No.
I don't.
No.
Who are you going to go get? You going to call up Cleveland and be like, hey, you got a lot of running backs. How much for Chubb? I mean,
Actually, they should do that for Duke Johnson, but that's beside the point.
Right.
Duke's still not your primary, but he's still not your primary back.
No, he's kind of what I guess they thought Tavon could be with the whole web back thing.
Yeah, totally.
I still don't understand what that is because, we really didn't see anything. But that's besides the point. If Ezekiel Elliott does that, he has all the leverage. I mean, obviously, I think the team's going to be we want you to, play out the contract and before we start talking new deal. But I mean, that's a tough situation because I think, like you said, I think Zeke would have the leverage there.
Yeah.
Almost force their hand and paying him, 2 years early.
Yeah. And that's where I wonder if they look at doing a Todd Gurley type deal, which, probably isn't something they want to do, but at least you're front loading it. So you're at least paying him most of the guaranteed money when he's giving you the top end production. But I don't know how, Zeke has to look at this and think what we've been talking about. Zeke has to look at this and think they want to do me like the Steelers did Le'Veon Bell, and I can't let them do that. Now, if he doesn't, it'd be great because obviously Cowboys have a lot of people to pay and they'd say get in line to Zeke, but he could force their hand because his value and leverage is higher now than it's ever been. Now maybe that's a catalyst for the Cowboys to go out there and invest, in a true feature running back in the draft. But now it's okay, tight end, defensive tackle, right? All of a sudden now we're talking about how many positions that the Cowboys are going to have to invest in the draft in. So that's the one thing that throws a wrench in these plans is I'm not paying Zeke. I don't know if I'm paying Zeke ever, but I'm certainly not going to pay Zeke now. But there is always that piece in the back of your mind that's thinking, well, what if he holds out? Because Zeke's smart. If we're talking about this, then he's got to know what's going on too.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you think is going through his mind, And so, and like you said, yeah, there's so many other things that they need in the draft, and do they definitely need a defensive tackle and a wide receiver. I mean, if you look at what they have, and they definitely need a tight end, and I've been looking at all those guys in the draft, and there's a lot of names out there. But so I wanted to pose a question to you.
Okay.
Which player's absence is going to make a bigger impact next year? Terrence Williams or David Irving?
Well, I think David Irving. Irving's a beast. I mean, and he's a unique kind of player. You know, he obviously has he's a fantastic pass rusher. I mean, he's played in, I think, 8 games in the last 2 seasons and has 7 sacks in 8 games. So, I mean,
he's a unicorn.
He is. And on top of that, like, his size, that's what I think makes him a unicorn, because even when he's not getting to the passer, he's able to use his hands and length to get in passing lanes. He can obviously rush in the interior, he can rush outside, so.
He can block kicks. Yeah.
He just doesn't care about football. Football's not a priority to him, and I think that's clear. And, there's always the chance down the road, like a Randy Gregory, that he eventually could figure out that football is important to him, but at this point it's not. And he's given us nothing but evidence that it isn't important to him.
I saw, it was somewhere on social media, and I guess it was David Irving was responding to a post or whatever. He said, I had no off-the-field issues. It was just the Cowboys holding me out. Dude, what?
Yes, of course.
You don't get it, buddy.
Yeah, yes, that makes sense. They'd like to not have a guy that has 7 sacks in 8 games on the field. Their preference would be to hold that guy out.
Yeah, their preference is to not give DeMarcus Lawrence any help whatsoever.
Yeah, they'd rather play Taco Charlton. That's what they want. They want to play Taco Charlton and Dorrance Armstrong.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to skip right over that taco comment. I think that the presence of I agree with you. I think David Irving's presence, obviously, but, they didn't get anything in the 2018 season from either player.
Yeah.
But, in the years prior to that, I thought Terrence Williams was a really good number 2 guy. The thing that drove everybody nuts about him was the body catching and the balls bouncing off his chest, or he had to jump in the air to catch a ball that was, easily catchable if he just get his hands away from his body. But I thought for what he was, what they drafted him, when they got him, and everything that he was able to provide to the Cowboys, I thought he was a really good receiver. I just think that people grew tired of, the inconsistencies. I think that the fan base grew tired of him on Twitter, because he didn't take criticism well at all.
Well, and he had some boneheaded plays, the not getting out of bounds thing, and the Giants game. But I mean, I think you're right. I think he's thought of as kind of a joke, and he was probably a pretty underappreciated component, because there are very few guys that are willingly accepting number 2 roles as a wide receiver. So a guy like T-Will is important because, there are very few guys that are willingly accepting of being the Y. Everybody wants to be an X. Most guys, they want to be the X. They want to be the number 1. They want to be the guy that gets all the targets and all the yardage. So to have a guy that's a really good, reliable receiver that's willing to play the Y, that's important. Also, he was a playoff touchdown machine. He had 2 touchdowns in the 2014 wildcard game against the Lions. He had a touchdown against Green Bay in that divisional playoff game. So I mean, he had 3 touchdowns in the playoffs in 2 games in 2014. So he was a touchdown machine in the postseason in 2014 for the Cowboys.
I mean, yeah, he did make some big plays. Obviously you're talking about the touchdown pass against Detroit when we got to see what they called Romoing. So yeah, that was a huge play. So yeah, he does make some of those plays, but I think overall he just has this negative connotation with the rest of the fan base.
Yeah, for sure. All right, this is the Cowboys Beat along CLNS Media. I'm excited to get into draft coverage as the NFL Draft Combine's coming up here in a couple of weeks. So then we'll have a better idea of sort of where we think some of these guys could go, especially with the Cowboys drafting so late in the second round. Make sure to follow all of the great draft content from my man Patrick Conn on Twitter at DraftCowboys. And all the great stuff he's doing for WFAA.com. I am Ari Temkin. You can follow me on Twitter at Ari Sports, ARI Sports. Of course, please check out my daily stream on the Cowboys at Phantom at Facebook.com/WatchPhantom, FANTOM. Other than that, for this week, for the Cowboys beat, for Patrick Conn, I'm Ari Temkin. We out. Peace.